Speaking of spiritual beings, there are stories now that the Sasquatch are psychic. And I know when you were in Nepal, you said you had seen a couple.
What I saw animals in a distance,
Right.
and the natives told me it was the Yeti. And at that time, interest in the Yeti was very high. And the publisher told me, I told them it was probably a bear. And they said, well, we'll make it into a Yeti. Give them something to sell. And,
well, apparently there is an alternate form of bear that's up there that they've, you know, I think Reinhold Messner, the great
Right.
climber, has done
I
a book
read
on
his
it.
book.
Yeah. And it sounds like there is this secondary being, or rare kind of a bear.
He believes in it enough so that he moved to Tibet, and I think he's still chasing it. I don't think he's caught it, but the Chinese and the Russians are very big on this, and they have financed big expeditions to go to these areas where they were seeing them in Russia and China, and so far they've turned up very little. And meanwhile, in the United States, in the state of Washington, somebody gave $5 million to one of the Bigfoot chasers, and he got helicopters out and all kinds of equipment and expensive equipment, and every time the phone rang, they'd all jump into the helicopter and try to go to the scene. And they spent the $5 million. They lived very well while they were chasing Bigfoot, but they never caught Bigfoot.
Well, there's a fellow named Lapsaritis who's written a book called The Psychic Sasquatch, and he claims that that's the totally wrong approach, that if you go into the forest and you quietly meditate for several days and follow these native meditations, that the Sasquatch will psychically or telepathically contact you. Do you think there's anything to that?
No, but it just wouldn't apply just to the Sasquatch. It would apply to almost anything. If you wanted to see a big bird, God, I just saw a big bird. They're flying. I guess they're out there. They're feeding on. There are a lot of wrens and small birds out there, and these hawks and things are coming in for their dinner. A terrible thought, but that's what they do. There's so much energy has been spent on these subjects. They're writing about them and exploring them, and we've always ended up with nothing, and that's made me not sour on these subjects, but I know that we have to take another approach that's entirely different. We had people in the 60s sitting in the TNT area all night because once some people saw something in the TNT area. They still came for years afterwards to the TNT area. And some of the people into witchcraft and the black arts were obviously in the TNT area because they put graffiti on in the buildings and stuff. And, but Mothman may have been a very temporary thing, just like most of the Bigfoot sightings are.
I found a couple of Buddhist paintings, really old, and they had the Garuda floating above the Buddha.
Right.
Do you have any knowledge of how the Buddhists feel about it? It's like he's a deity of some kind.
Well, it may be that just when they saw it, they thought it was a spiritual thing. It was so different. And so they included it in their spiritual drawings and paintings. As you know, in Indonesia, they have belief in the Garuda going way back. The American Indians have believed in the Thunderbird for generations. And in some cases, they thought the Thunderbird was very dangerous, would attack you, which may be true, because if you get attacked by a giant creature like that, there's not going to be any evidence left of the attack. It's going to carry you away and eat you.
Sort of like in Braxton County, you were saying that some teenagers were missing.
They had a lot of disappearances of teenagers in those days. they were hitchhiking because hitchhiking used to be legal, and that was the way kids got around. And they would go out they were hitchhiking to the football games and never show up. And the police at that time tried to keep it as quiet as they could, which they always do. We had things happen here in Point Pleasant that they tried to keep quiet.
Mm-hmm.
So that annoys them, especially when someone like me shows up. And
we found that the waterways in West Virginia seem to be where most of the sightings have occurred. You can follow the Ohio back to the Kanawha, back to the Elk. And do you think there's something about water that aids this process?
Water and blood. In the Mothman days, they seem to have a real interest in blood. And this is also sort of a taboo subject, especially if you're being interviewed for television. They don't want to talk about that. They usually are waiting for me to say something really sensational. So in a 2-hour interview, they can take 30 seconds and put that on the air.
Well, we're going to put the whole thing in there, so we'll get
Well,
but that's it for my questions, unless Gary's got a couple.
I'm just fascinated.
Well, we've got so many mysteries on our hands. It's better to be normal and not pay any attention to mysteries.
Are you still actively investigating?
No, not actively, because we had a bunch of sightings of Bigfoot up in the Catskill Mountains 2 or 3 years ago. And the only reason I went up there was my informant was one of the game wardens, the people who watch for forest fires and things. And we had the very good witnesses, and whatever these things are, they vanished as fast as they came. I've had reports where witnesses have seen a Bigfoot, and the Bigfoot would reach down to the ground, and he would catch the hand of another Bigfoot and pull it up out of the ground, the solid ground, and the two of them would walk away. So that's a pretty good indication right there that it's something other than an animal that we're watching. We're watching the behavior of a paraphysical object.
Well, I had a Bigfoot. I never saw it, but I was in the Catskills once in the early '80s camping, and I got this frightening chill, and I was very sure that it was some kind of a Bigfoot